It'll record pretty much from here to like but if you want to wonder, then that's fine too.
I'll just do what I do, but I'll try to stay within those guidelines.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'll do a quick intro and a request that folks stick around for our evaluation.
I'm going to just ask you a question before you do the intro. Well, actually, no, I'll wait. You can do the intro and then I'll do it.
Oh, yeah.
Leave the doors open for airflow, and if it gets too loud, then I'll close it.
Oh, okay. Heidi, I just started this morning. So, 10,000
Tuesday, 11:45. 11:45. Good. So it'll be 90 minutes.
You want me to go for it? Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the part 1 of the exercise intensity workshop with Dr. Ayla Donlin. You guys know her, LifeFit Director. This has been in the works for a while, and we've waited till we had a good scheduling time to do these workshops. So thank you all for being here. It's nice to see a full house, pretty full house. Just so that you guys are all aware, we are recording this. So heckling is welcome. But we are going to record it, and I promise I'm working on getting them up on the website. Slowly but surely it's going to happen. Please stick around after the workshop if you don't mind. We do have some evals, so if you wouldn't mind filling out one for Ayla, that would be marvelous. And Ayla, take it away. Thank you.
Excellent. Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes. So exercise intensity. Before I launch into what I have to share with you today, I want to get an idea of some of your thoughts of what exercise intensity is. So we're going to do just a little bit of idea generation, and I'm going to write it on the board. So when you think of exercise intensity, what do you think of?
It's harder.
Harder. Okay.
Rapid heart.
Yes.
Faster heartbeat. Spurts like hard intensity and then more relaxed. You know, like
So like interval training.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Intervals. What else?
Increased energy use.
Increased energy use, says the doctor in the house. Okay. Increased energy use. Okay.
increase the heartbeat. Makes you sweat.
Okay. Sweat. Increased heartbeat, heart rate. HR, heart rate. Okay. What else?
Discomfort.
Yeah.
Discomfort.
So tired.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Hugh?
Good.
Okay, cool.
Tired. Duration.
Duration. Connie, you must have a great coach, huh? Duration, okay. What else?
Increased respiratory rate.
Increased respiratory, you guys, okay. Increased heart rate and respiratory rate. I'm going to close this door because we got a treadmill going out there, but I'm going to leave that back door open for air circulation. All right. Anything else with exercise intensity that you think about?
All these things have to do with more intensity. I think of also there is a recovery period that's less intense.
Okay, so the recovery period. You know what? That's going in blue, Bill. Recovery. Excellent. And that is actually an excellent segue because intensity is the whole spectrum from low intensity recovery to higher intensity like interval training, right? So we're going to talk about exercise intensity in the whole spectrum, the whole capacity. We're going to today talk about exercise intensity. What is it? And why is it important? And this is part 1 of a 3-part series. So I'm going to scroll ahead. You do not have to attend part 1 to understand part 2 or part 3. So if you're going to miss part 2, don't panic and think that you can't show up to part 3. You absolutely can. So today, part 1, July 13th, it's a Wednesday as well at noon, we're going to talk about heart rate training. The 101 and 201 of heart rate training. How many of you in this room own a MyZone heart rate monitor? Okay, a majority. Excellent. For those of you who own a MyZone monitor, this workshop is for you. For those of you who don't own a monitor, this workshop is for you. It's for everyone. It's for everyone. Part 3 is August 10th. Again, a Wednesday at noon. And we're going to talk about purposeful intensity. How do we arrange our low, our moderate, our high intensity to optimize our fitness and health goals? How do we arrange our intensity to meet our goals? So we're going to talk about that in August. Sound like a plan? Excellent. Okay. So I asked you all, intensity, what is it? And you gave me all kinds of ideas that we're going to talk about today. So the definition of intensity is the measurable amount of a property. So it's the degree or amount of strength, of power, or force that something has. And we're going to break it down today by component of fitness. So we're going to be talking about cardio, about resistance training, about flexibility, and we're going to talk about intensity as it relates to those components of fitness. But first, a little illustration of some intensity. And I'm going to show you the trainer who trained Asia. So those of you who have had Asia as a trainer in any capacity will better understand where Asia's coming from, okay? So this is the trainer who trained Asia.
No, you might want to stop. Perfect. Yeah? Yeah. All right. No, look, Frank. Yeah. Nice and easy. 1, there we go. 2, oh, yeah, good burn. I can do that. 3, now Euro training. Okay, this is a pretty good pace, but we're gonna kick things up a notch, okay? Okay. All right, you might wanna step back. Step back? Yeah. Okay. All right. I do this all day. Okay, let's take this up a notch.
Do you get it now? So I showed that because I think so often when we hear the word intensity, that's what we think of. We think of high intensity crazy, all out, all the time. And intensity is so much more than that, and it's really important to use it wisely. That clip cracks me up. Oh boy. Many of you have heard me talk about the FIT principle before. F for frequency, I for intensity, which is what we're talking about today, T for time, and then the second T is for type of exercise. So we're going to break this down because I like to think of intensity in that framework, within the FIT principle. You can think of frequency as how often, how many times a day, how many times a week, how many times a month. Intensity is how hard, light, moderate, vigorous intensity. I want to tell you all too, this slideshow will be available as a PDF on our website and our Facebook page. So I didn't give out handouts because we're going to have the PDF available electronically on the website and the Facebook page. So intensity is how hard. Time is how long, or duration, as I believe Connie so eloquently said earlier. Time is how long, and type is the mode of exercise. Can someone give me an example of a mode of exercise? What does that mean? Bicycling. Bicycling, which is a form of cardiorespiratory exercise. Exactly. Another mode of exercise. Weight training. And within weight training, I can be doing body weight resistance, I can use resistance bands, I can use dumbbells, I can use barbells. There's a lot of variety that you can have. So within a component of fitness, like resistance training or muscular fitness, there are a lot of different modes or modalities of exercise. Does that make sense? Cool. There's this awesome relationship, the intensity-duration relationship, which is why I was so delighted to hear Connie say duration. In theory, the lower the intensity, the longer we can sustain it. And again, how you want to use this intensity-duration relationship will depend largely on your fitness goals, right? But based on the way that our body produces and uses energy, if something is a lower intensity mode of exercise, or if we're working at a lower intensity, we can sustain it for a longer duration. If something is higher intensity, we can sustain it for a shorter duration. And that's from a physiological standpoint as far as energy use and production is concerned. But also from a training standpoint, what we want to be careful of is the total volume and the total intensity of our exercise. If we're too intense for too long, we're at risk of overtraining, which puts us at greater risk for injury and illness. And Emily and I are actually going to be doing a live Periscope broadcast this Friday at 8 a.m. We broadcast live every Friday at 8 a.m. I don't know if any of you use Periscope. It's this really cool new app that's connected to Twitter. I don't know if any of you do the tweeting, but it allows you to stream live. And we are MyZone master trainers for the MyZone heart rate monitor. And every Friday we do a live broadcast at 8 a.m. for them. This Friday, we're talking about overtraining. And a big part of that conversation is, how are you working with the intensity-duration relationship, right? So this is, in theory, lower intensity we can sustain for a longer duration, higher intensity, shorter duration. So when we think about intervals, that's why we're having a short duration, high intensity burst, followed by a lower intensity recovery. And the ratio can be a pretty wide spectrum as far as the push to the recovery ratio. Does that make sense? Awesome. Intensity-duration relationship is an inverse relationship. Components of fitness, yeah.
Questions allowed during the
Questions are allowed. Bring it on.
How can you tell, body-wise, if your intensity is lasting too long or too great an intensity? Because many times when you over-exercise, later you're ill. Or later So how can you tell why you're intensely exercising that it's time to quit?
Great question. There are a lot of indicators that could be letting you know that maybe you're working at a little bit too high of an intensity for a little bit too long. For example, one would be if you continue to increase the workload for, like on a spin bike, you're continuing to add resistance and trying to work harder, but your heart rate's not responding, it's not going up. That might be an indication that you've been a little bit too high for a little bit too long. Or your workload hasn't changed at all and your heart rate goes pew. That might be an indication that you've been at an intensity for a little bit too long, a high intensity for too long. A lot of this comes with body awareness, and that is a matter of trial and error. So over time, how do you notice your body is responding to exercise? And we'll talk about in Heart Rate Training 101 and 201 some things that you can look for using the MyZone system that might be an indication that you are overtraining. We'll talk about that. So that's going to be more in part 2 and part 3 of this series. Yeah. Anything else before I move into components of fitness? Of course. Yeah. The 3 components of fitness that I'm going to address today in this exercise intensity workshop are cardio, resistance training, and flexibility. And I don't know how well you can see this photo, but this is amazing. Whew. One of our interns found this, and this young lady must be in her 80s doing this. It's phenomenal. So it goes to show the training that we put our bodies through. Our bodies will respond to it, and they will respond throughout our lifespan to the training. So we'll talk about cardio, resistance training, and flexibility. So what is intensity related to cardiorespiratory training or cardiorespiratory fitness? We can measure our intensity in many different ways. 3 of the most common are heart rate, where we're looking at our heart rate response to a workload or a stimulus during cardio. Rate of perceived exertion, which you can see up here. We use a rate of perceived exertion scale. And the talk test. How many of you have used the talk test before during exercise? Okay, great. The idea behind the talk test is that the lower intensity, you're able to say a few sentences at a time, carry on a casual conversation. The higher the intensity, the less you're able to say, the less you can talk. And at the top of the scale, which would be like a 9-10, talking becomes really difficult. It becomes more a series of facial gestures or maybe some certain hand gestures, if you know what I mean, right at that point. Okay. So those are the 3 most common ways that we would measure intensity during cardiorespiratory fitness. What is recommended in terms of intensity? And of course this is connected to duration, because many times intensity and duration are offered together when exercise prescriptions are offered. So the American College of Sports Medicine recommends that you accumulate 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise per week, or a combination of the 2. This is a great illustration of the intensity duration relationship, because if you're working out at moderate intensities, you should be doing that for a little bit longer. If you're working out at higher intensities, you can do that for a little bit shorter of a time and still glean many of the same benefits. In fact, research might even suggest that you might gain a few additional benefits working out at a higher intensity, even though it's for a shorter duration. If that makes sense. So what does that mean? What is moderate intensity? What is vigorous intensity? Moderate intensity, when you're using heart rate to measure it, is between 50 to 75% of maximum heart rate. Using the MyZone system, that's gray, blue, and green zones, right? Those are our more low to moderate intensity zones. On the rate of perceived exertion chart, that would relate to a 5 to 7 on a scale of 10. 1 is very light. 1 is that you're just casually standing, walking, talking. 10 is maximal all out effort. You're either gonna puke, pass out, or something else at that intensity, right? So moderate intensity is between a 5 and a 7. Vigorous intensity is between 75% and 100% plus of your maximum heart rate. Using the MyZone system, that's yellow and red zones. Yeah. That's an 8 to 10 on the rate of perceived exertion chart. So that's how we would measure intensity for cardiorespiratory fitness. Going back to Carol Sue's question about how do I tell, if I'm working at too high of an intensity for too long, one of the things that you can use as a litmus test, you can use these 3 ways of measuring intensity as a checks and balance system. If you feel like your rate of perceived exertion is a 9 or a 10, but your MyZone heart rate belt is only showing you that you're in like green, which is blue or green, which is indicating moderate intensity, that could mean many things, but one of the things that it could mean is that you're a little overtrained. Your body is fatigued, your system isn't as responsive, you need to take a little bit of a break. Does that make sense?
You mean take a break right then?
Take a break right then, and probably take a break for a little while. Yeah, depending on how long you've been overtraining. Yeah. Again, we're going to address this in more detail during part 2 and part 3 of this series. Yeah. Any questions on cardiorespiratory intensity? Okay. It should feel hard to get into the yellow and red zones if you're wearing your MyZone monitor. If you're a MyZone monitor wearer and it does not feel challenging to get into yellow and red, you need to talk to me, you need to talk to Emily, you need to talk to Asia, because we need to go into the MyZone system and we need to adjust your maximum heart rate, because the MyZone system is estimating your maximum heart rate. So we need to adjust it so that it's more accurate for you. Everyone is different. So it's an estimation, it's not an exact. So if you don't feel like it's challenging to get into yellow and red, you got to talk to us, because we got to adjust the system so that you're gleaning the benefits that you think you are. Yeah? Okay, awesome. Resistance training intensity, and this is key. We emphasize the importance of resistance training, and it's also incredibly important that you're exercising at the appropriate intensities to be gleaning the benefits that you want from your resistance training. So the way that we would measure intensity with resistance training is with load and repetition speed. And there's a relationship between force and velocity when we're looking at intensity of resistance training. So we're talking about, are we okay with the background noise, or should we close that door? Yeah, do you mind, Deb? We'll see how the airflow goes, and if we need to reopen it, we will. So we're talking about how much weight are you moving, and how fast are you moving it. That's how we would measure intensity related to resistance training. So some general recommendations to be using the appropriate intensities to train muscular characteristics are as follows. If you're looking to train muscular endurance, which means that you can sustain large dynamic movements, so using major muscle groups over time, then you would want to be training 12 to 15 repetitions, and you'd want to use a weight or a load that challenges you at 12 to 15 reps. So by the time you get to your 12, 13, 14, 15, you feel challenged to complete that last repetition. Not that you're failing out, but you feel challenged to complete the last repetition. Doing that for 2 to 3 sets. So you're going to do that 12 to 15 repetitions 2 to 3 times. And the repetition speed should be about 2 seconds concentric, 2 seconds eccentric. Example of a bicep curl. This would be the concentric phase. This is the eccentric phase. During the concentric phase, the muscle is shortening and getting huge. And then during the eccentric phase, the muscle is lengthening and controlling the load as it lowers away. So it's 1, 1,002, 1, 1,002. A nice steady rhythm, a nice steady pace. On the squat, the eccentric phase is on the way down, 1, 1,002. Concentric is on the way up, 1, 1,002. So 2 seconds on the concentric, 2 seconds eccentric. Hypertrophy is muscular growth, trying to gain a little bit of lean mass. This does not mean that you are going to be popping muscles everywhere and being a bodybuilder. This just means that you are maintaining and or growing a little bit of lean mass. Hypertrophy is a good thing, especially related to bone health, which we're going to talk about as well. Hypertrophy, you would be choosing a load that challenged you at 8 to 12 repetitions. So by the 10th, 11th, 12th rep, you couldn't do any more. That's more weight than many of us estimate. And I know that those of you in Strength for Living know what I'm talking about, because you do your 1 rep max and you tell me what you think you can do for your 1 rep max, and then you do 15 repetitions of that. And then we have to increase the load, right? So you want to choose a load that challenges you to finish the last 2 to 3 repetitions that you're seeking to complete. Same rhythm on the repetition speed, 1, 1,002, 1, 1,002. Or you could try to use a 2 to 1 rep speed, where your eccentric phase is actually a little bit shorter than your concentric phase. So it would mean, I think I'm meaning that in the reverse. Your concentric phase is a little bit shorter than your eccentric phase. So it would be 1, 1,000 and then 1, 1,002. Make sense? And on the squat, it would be 1, 1,002, 1, 1,000. So you're using a little bit more force or a little more velocity when you're in the concentric phase for hypertrophy. Questions on that so far? Okay. Muscular strength. And muscular strength is hugely important and hugely related to bone health, because we have to work our muscles, which then connect to bone and put the stress and strain on the bone that's necessary to maintain bone mass and build bone mass. We need to be working muscular strength. So there you're using a load that challenges you to complete 4 to 6 repetitions. This is heavy weight, my friends. And you can do it, and you can do it safely. Make sure that you've got a spotter, make sure you're using appropriate technique. But this is important to do. And it's the appropriate intensity if you want to see gains in muscular strength and if you want to see gains in bone density. So 4 to 6 repetition maximum, and then 2x2 speed on that one as well. And you might find that your concentric phase takes you a little bit longer than that 2x2, because you're now using a weight that's so heavy that it might take you a little bit longer to get it to where you're trying to get it to. Make sense? But still controlled on the eccentric, because you wouldn't want to do right? You want to control in all range of motion, the whole range of motion. Power. Let's talk about muscular power. Power is interesting because we're now decreasing the load and increasing the velocity. So we're taking down the amount of weight that we're using, but we're increasing the speed by which we're moving in. So you want to pick a more moderate weight and do 1 to 6 repetitions of explosive movement. The best way to start out doing this is with body weight. Try these power exercises with body weight first, and then you can start to use more moderate loads. The speed is more explosive, so you're taking 1 second on the concentric phase and 2 seconds on the eccentric phase. So a good example of a power-based exercise is a medicine ball slam or one of the Dynamax ball slams, because you're loading up and then you come down and you wham, and that takes about 1 second, and then you reload up, and that takes maybe 1/1000, 2, wham, 1. So it's a very powerful, it's a very explosive movement, but you're only using 8 to 10 pounds, maybe even 6 pounds in that movement. And what power-based training does for us is it improves our agility, and it improves the way that our muscles function in terms of being able to move weight a little bit more quickly. And so agility is our ability to change direction. Agility is our ability to go from one position into the next, and to both accelerate and decelerate. And what do you think agility is incredibly important for? Balance. Balance. It's huge. It's huge. So one of the biggest recommendations in balance training and fall prevention is power-based resistance training. And those of you who are in Strength for Living, this probably sounds very familiar because our Strength for Living program is designed to go through 4 weeks of endurance training, 4 weeks of hypertrophy training, 4 weeks of strength training, and 4 weeks of power training. And you want to build that sequence in order so that you first have a foundation of endurance, and then you work into more power-based movements. Does that make sense? Let me emphasize one more time that to truly train strength, you need to use a load where you are fatiguing out before 6 repetitions. This is heavy weight, my friends. So grab a spotter if you need it, but it's important to do. And if you have questions on that, work with the trainer for a little while and get some background on that because it's incredibly important. Any questions on this? Yes.
In one workout, could you have multiple of these then? Or do all of them?
Great question. So let's call these muscular characteristics. So within muscular fitness, we've got these different muscular characteristics. My recommendation, especially if you're newer to a resistance training program, would be to work one characteristic at a time. And maybe not just for that workout, but maybe for like 2 to 3 to 4 weeks at a time. So you're doing all endurance-based activity for 4 weeks, then you move into hypertrophy. Once you've played in all of these realms, then you can start to sprinkle a little bit of everything throughout the week. So maybe Monday is going to be endurance, Wednesday is going to be strength, and Friday is going to be power. I'd probably choose the inverse of that. Monday is power, Wednesday is strength, and Friday is endurance, because you want to come into a power workout pretty fresh. Yeah. So you can really play with it. That's what we're going to talk about in part 3, purposeful intensity. Yeah.
How about the time? So you're working on endurance for 20 minutes, or how long do you take for that?
The answer you're going to hear me give a lot is it depends. It depends on your fitness goals. In general, you want to be completing 8 to 10 exercises for all major muscle groups of the body at least twice a week. So that's probably going to take between 30 and 45 minutes per session in general. Yeah. Resistance training, I highly recommend doing at least 2 days a week. I think it's incredibly important for health and fitness, both. Yeah. Any other questions on resistance training? Okay, cool. That leads to flexibility, an often ignored component of fitness, but an incredibly important one. The way that we measure intensity related to flexibility is range of motion and level of discomfort. And again, let me clarify. More discomfort is not necessarily better, okay? For example, the recommendation when we're doing static stretching, so when we're just holding a stretch, you want to go to the end point of your range of motion, and that should be a point in which you are experiencing mild discomfort. Emphasis on mild. You don't want to take yourself to a place where you are in pain or where you are incredibly uncomfortable. The idea is to slowly start to increase your range of motion over time. So you want to start with mild discomfort, And you want to sit in that place of mild discomfort. So this is also character building, my friends. You sit in that place of mild discomfort for about a minute. That's what's recommended for this age group. It's about a minute and doing 2 sets of that. So you just get in the full splits, Lori, and you just hold it for a minute. You know? What was your question?
Well, what would your example be on like static stretching?
Yes. So I think the classic static stretch that I always think about is a forward fold, right? And in a forward fold, some of us might get our fingers to our knees, some of us might have our head on the floor. Everybody's got a different range of motion, right? This gal would be walking circles around us, okay? But you want to go to the point at which you're experiencing mild discomfort, not anymore, and then hold there for a minute. And then maybe when you go back to do your second set, you can go a little further, but still not more than mild discomfort. Make sense? Okay. So we have static stretching where we're just holding a stretch, and then we also have dynamic stretching. And I'm actually going to take you all through an example of a dynamic stretch because we're ready to do a little something. So I'm going to invite you actually to stand up. It's an invitation, not an obligation, so if you don't want to stand up, you don't have to. But an example of a dynamic stretch is where we move from a smaller range of motion into a larger range of motion. So what we're going to do is we're going to stand hip width apart. And we're going to start to make small itty bitty little hip circles. Just small itty bitty in whatever direction you want. And this is, believe it or not, a dynamic stretch. We're starting in a small range of motion, and then we would slowly make this a little bit bigger. And do you feel how things start to change when you make it a little bit bigger? You maybe feel things stretching a little bit differently than you did in your small range. And then let's go large range. And you want to gradually work your way there. So the recommendation I have on the board is 20 to 30 seconds in each level. So let's change directions, but let's go small. Small circles first. And or 8 to 10 reps. So maybe 8 to 10 reps or 20 to 30 seconds. So now let's go to moderate circles. And the idea is when you get to your large range of motion, that is your end point range of motion. And you should not be experiencing anything more than mild discomfort. So let's go large hip circles. And again, don't take yourself anywhere bigger than mild discomfort.
What if you don't have discomfort?
If you don't have discomfort, you just keep rocking and rolling, Lori. put some hand motions in, Lori. You know? Make it your move.
That feels
All right.
good.
Doesn't it feel good?
It feels good. It doesn't hurt.
Exactly. Stretching shouldn't hurt. It should maybe be a little bit uncomfortable at times, but it shouldn't hurt. Because you don't want to create injury. You don't want to create muscle strains. You only want to take yourself to your end point range of motion. Any questions on flexibility at all and intensity?
Would a static stretch be a wall sit?
A wall sit would be an isometric exercise, which is a muscular endurance exercise.
It's one of the things I least like to do. It's hard.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you should do it.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're, that's a great question. If you're using an isometric muscular endurance exercise, like a plank hold, I'm looking at Ayla because she's the queen of planks, or a wall squat, wall sit, then you would want to hold that for a duration of anywhere from 30 seconds to, I know some of you are working up to 4, 5, 6 minutes, but that is over time, right? So go to a point where you're starting to experience some fatigue, and then you take a break. And then you maybe do another set, and you work up over time to a longer duration, right? Yeah. Brilliant. I think you can stay where you are because, if I'm correct, we've got a dance break. Yes. Okay. And will you hit the lights? And if you so choose, you can follow along. Or you can do your own variation of a dance. But
A
this
little
is
worried
just-
after seeing the last clip.
Yeah. Again, it's optional. Yeah. All right. Now you've got moves. Now you got moves for days. All right. Feel free to take a seat whenever you're ready. I was impressed with the dancing. That was great. You know what we're putting into practice? We're putting into practice Dr. Rosenek's policy, which was to stand and do some movement about every half an hour, right? That is sitting the new smoking. So we've met our requirement for this hour, which is great. A little dance break. That's from a movie called Napoleon Dynamite. Just that scene is probably all that you need to take away from that movie. So there we go. All right, so we've talked about intensity. What is it? Now let's talk about why is it important, right? What is it? Why is it important? Intensity is incredibly important to see the changes that we want to see. We have to use the appropriate intensity to create the change that we're seeking related to our health and fitness goals. So this is related to fitness training parameters. This is related to health changes that we want to see. Decreased blood pressure, decreased cholesterol, increased bone density, those types of health changes. Weight loss, intensity is incredibly important related to weight loss. Periodization and variety are incredibly important to prevent overtraining, overuse, and injury. And intensity is a key piece in periodization and variety. And we're going to talk about both of those during part 2 and part 3 of this series. And of course, intensity is very important to your planning and your goal setting because you're going to be probably planning and goal setting related to all of these pieces. So I want to break these down just a little bit. With cardiorespiratory fitness, we must be training at the appropriate intensities to see fitness improvements in our aerobic capacity. Aerobic capacity is our ability to take in oxygen, get it to the cells of the muscles that are working so that those cells can convert and use oxygen as energy. The higher our aerobic capacity, the higher intensities that we can work at for a sustained duration, because that energy system allows us to work at higher Expanding our aerobic capacity allows us to work at higher intensities for longer durations. That comes with time. What you'll notice when you're first starting a workout program, you can push up into yellow and red or up into what would feel like an 8, 9, 10 on the rate of perceived exertion chart, but you probably can only hold it for a few seconds before you kaput out, right? So the more fit we become, the more we can hold up on those higher intensities before we fatigue, right? And what also you'll notice, this lovely phenomena, is the more fit you become, it actually becomes more challenging to get up into those higher intensities. Because we have to use higher and higher workloads, more resistance, more speed, on the bike especially, in order to get our heart rate up into those higher levels. Because we've become so efficient, we can work at a lower heart rate at higher and higher workloads. Does that all make sense? Okay. Lactate thresholds, blood lactate accumulates when we're up in higher intensity exercise. So again, expanding our lactate threshold allows us to work at higher intensities for a longer duration. Blood lactate, you probably have heard the misconception that blood lactate or lactic acid, and they're not the same thing, but that's what causes muscle fatigue. That's not the case. There's a thing called acidosis, and it's actually more from the production of hydrogen ions, which are a metabolic byproduct of the energy production system that causes acidosis, and that's what causes fatigue, and we kaput out. So blood lactate in and of itself is a good thing, and the more our body is able to buffer lactate, the more we can work at higher intensities for a longer duration. But in order to expand aerobic capacity and in order to elevate our lactate threshold, we must work at higher intensities. So it's important to be working at the right intensities to improve those things. Health-wise, right, if we want to see an increase in cardiac output, an increase in stroke volume, the amount of blood that we're able to put out into our system, then we need to work at both lower intensities for a longer duration to build a base, because building the base allows us to build our vascular system. We can expand the little baby vascular entities called capillaries that go out and connect into our muscles that are the working pieces. And so then we can better serve our body. Our heart gets stronger and it's able to put out more blood per beat, and then it's able to push more blood through our system, both on the way out and then exchanging on the way in. So health-wise, working at the appropriate intensities is a big thing. You must work at the lower intensities to build a base, and then you can start to play around with the moderate high intensities. Weight loss. This one is key as far as intensity is concerned, and I think many people have a misconception around exercise and weight loss. Here's a classic example, and this is using metabolic equivalents, and this is for me, for Ayla Donlin. If I'm working for 30 minutes on a treadmill, going 4 miles an hour, and that's just at a standard incline, so 0 level, nothing, no other incline. And I'm working at 50 to 60% of my maximum heart rate, which would be moderate intensity. I would burn 190 calories. 30 minutes, 4 miles an hour, working between 50 and 60% of my maximum heart rate, moderate intensity, I'm burning 190 calories an hour. If I bump the speed up by 2 miles an hour, which would also increase my heart rate, my percentage of maximum heart rate, so I'm now at 30 minutes at 6 miles an hour, working a little bit higher, moderate intensity, getting into vigorous intensity, I'm burning 312 calories. So in the same amount of time, I've expanded a considerable amount of additional calories because I've increased the intensity by a little bit. I've increased the workload by increasing the miles an hour that I'm working at, and I've increased the intensity because that means that my heart rate elevates to be able to accommodate that workload. So the amount of food that I would need to consume to fuel this workout and then replenish after this workout is very different considering those two different intensities, right? So oftentimes I think we have the misunderstanding that 30 minutes is 30 minutes. 30 minutes isn't 30 minutes. It depends on the intensity that you're working at, right? So those are, I think, very key things to keep in mind. If weight loss is your goal, then you will want to map out the intensity that is necessary to produce the caloric expenditure that you're looking for. And exercise is just one side of the house. And we've got the nutrition side of the house, which is also incredibly important. So that's a conversation that we could probably have for a long, long time. But I just wanted to highlight that in terms of the difference in terms of intensity. It's not enough just to go through the motions. It's not enough to just show up and go through the motions for 30 minutes. You have to be purposeful about what you're doing in order to meet the goals that you're seeking to obtain, right? Don't get me wrong on that one. A little bit of something is better than nothing. So show up, right? Show up, and if all you can do is a little bit that day, magnificent. Magnificent. Then maybe you'll be ready the next day to do a little bit more. So you've got to be patient with your body too. Any questions on that? Okay. So we have to organize our cardiorespiratory intensity appropriately to meet our goals.
Ayla, I do have a question.
Yes, fire away,
When
Jean.
we're talking about weight loss,
Mhm.
you don't want to lose lean muscle, you want to lose fat.
Mhm.
So does the way you train differ when you're concentrating on lean muscle or not?
Yes, it does. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit with resistance training, but let me get into that right now. I wish that there was a magical button that we could hit that would be like, boop, fat loss only, boop, but there's not. So when we're losing weight, we're often going to be losing fat mass and lean mass. It's just inevitably going to happen. What we can do to mitigate lean mass loss is resistance training. And then be mindful about the type and the duration of cardiorespiratory exercise that you're doing. But the more lean mass that you have currently and the more lean mass that you can build, then the more lean mass you will sustain or obtain while you are losing fat. But it's really hard to, because of the way that our body works, it would be incredibly challenging to be building lean mass and losing fat mass significantly at the same time. Does that make sense? Because there's the whole energy in, energy out relationship. Because you have to consume enough calories to fuel your workouts, but you have to expend enough calories that you're not in a positive energy balance where you're gaining weight, right? So a lot of this is trial and error. That recipe is not necessarily magically perfect either. So I can't say I want to lose 1 pound. 1 pound equals 3,500 calories. So that means that I'm going to burn 500 calories for a workout 5 days a week. I'm not going to change my calories and boom, that means I'm going to lose a pound. Not necessarily. There are so many other factors. If you're stressed out, how well are you sleeping? How well are you hydrated? There's a lot of factors that will play into the weight loss dynamic. But one of the best things that you can do for weight maintenance and weight loss is resistance training, because it helps you sustain and build lean mass. And lean mass is much more metabolically active than fat mass. So if you're building lean mass, you're turning your body into more of a calorie burning furnace than if you don't have as much lean mass and you're carrying more fat mass. The more lean mass you have, the more calories you're going to expend during all other types of exercise and at rest. So if we want to see increased endurance and strength, we have to train the intensity of those appropriately, right? We talked about those parameters. If you want to see increased power, you have to train that appropriately. I can't only train muscular endurance and expect my muscular power to increase. It doesn't work that way. Specificity, the principle of specificity, one of my favorite words in the whole wide world. You have to train very specifically to see those changes. And then we'll see increased lean mass, particularly around hypertrophy and strength-based training. So health-wise, we're increasing our metabolism because we're increasing our lean mass. And if we do strength-based training and then hypertrophy a little bit and power a little bit, will play into building bone density, or at least mitigating bone density loss, which happens rapidly after the age of 30 and even more so as we age. So it's incredibly important for health purposes to use the appropriate intensities. And then I was already talking about the lean mass caloric expenditure relationship with resistance training. Make sense? Cool. Cool. All right. So that concludes what I wanted to share with you today about exercise intensity. And I think we addressed a lot of what you had talked about as far as your perceptions of intensity. Are there any other questions that I can answer for you today? Yes?
The guilt thing doesn't happen?
Uh-huh.
Can you do the same thing with the Fitbit?
You can do similar things with the Fitbit. There are pros and cons to each type of wearable device. The Fitbit, because it's around your wrist, is giving you maybe a little bit less accurate of a heart rate, which will then provide for you a little bit less accurate of caloric expenditure. But what we know too is that the MyZone heart rate belt does not give perfect caloric expenditure. It actually has a tendency to slightly overestimate your caloric expenditure. So that's why it's so important to not necessarily try to arrange everything based on caloric output, right? So if you burn 350 calories, that doesn't mean you can go have 350 calories of cookies or whatever it might be. So just keep that in mind. But yes, you can use the Fitbit to try and monitor some of the intensity, but a heart rate strap is probably more important from an exercise intensity standpoint. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, Hugh.
Yeah, the iPad has something like that on it. Is that very accurate?
That's the health app,
Yeah.
right? The white tile with the heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. That connects with and communicates with certain wearable devices, so you can get some information based on that. And if you want more information, I think Emily Sopo is our resident expert on those technology pieces. So, and it was actually Emily's thesis research that broke the spell of let us know that MyZone tends to overestimate a little bit the caloric expenditure of the belts. That was tested on like college age folk, so we don't know if the same is applicable for older adults, but that's what Emily found across that age group. Yeah. And
To what degree does it overestimate?
do you want to give just like a general idea, Em? Great.
It depends. The work rate that we had folks at was between like 60 and 75% of the maximal heart rate, more like 60 to 70%, and they were only doing one exercise for like 30 minutes. So if you're doing multiple types of exercise, if you're resistance training or working at a higher work rate, it all goes bonkers. It is no longer a critical study. That's why it's so hard. That's why you have to take all of the caloric expenditures with a grain of salt for every wearable device. It's good to know.
Yeah. So I shared that with you just to illustrate that no wearable device is perfect. They all have shortcomings. And so with MyZone, we've identified that as one potential shortcoming, right? Yours may or may not be perfectly accurate for you, but that's what was found in Emily's thesis. Yeah.
Well, I typically get an email from MyZone on Tuesday or Wednesday saying, congratulations, you have met your exercise goals for the week.
Yep.
Is that enough overtraining? Because that's so early in the week.
Great question. When you get that email from MyZone that says congratulations, that means that you've met the minimum recommended guidelines for physical activity. It means that you've accumulated the 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise. So it's going to depend on your individual goals, how much above and beyond that you go. So that's the minimum recommendation. So if you're meeting that by Monday or Tuesday, that's cool. But then you got to just see what you're doing through the rest of the week. I'd have to look at the rest of your training schedule to know how, if you're doing too much. Yeah. But what's cool about MyZone is that they developed that MyZone effort point system, the MEPS system, to let you know when you've met the recommended guidelines. That's pretty sweet. So you can check that off the list, and if it happens on Monday or Tuesday, that doesn't mean don't work out the rest of the week. It just means that you've met those guidelines already. Yeah.
I'm canceling Lauren.
Any other questions at all? Well, I hope that this was helpful. If you have more follow-up questions about intensity, reach out to me and then reach out to trainers, and we'll help get you set up. Part 2 is heart rate training 101, 201. Part 3 is purposeful intensity, and we're going to get into cardio, resistance training, flexibility, and balance when we talk about purposeful intensity. Thanks for joining me today. So if you would, please go out and
That heart rate monitoring is awesome.
you don't wear it over here and just come around the pens.
So they sell them at the doors.
I need to fill out that already.
Okay.
And then you wear it when you exercise. And it tells you exactly, like, I also have my, do you have an iPhone? So this is the app, and so this tells me what, where, so that was me, I just did Pilates class, I did 2, so it says that I did 51 minutes of exercise, it says I burned 209 calories, but now I don't really know. I have 58 MEPs. MEPs are based on these colors, on the chart, how hard I worked out. And so it tells me where I was in my workout. Now, let me just show you really intense one. That's my friend Christine. That was really intense. So yellow, she was in the 80 to 90, but that was hard workout.
You're way up.
Yeah, that's her. I'll show you a really, here's Asia's workout, so we track each other.
I was like, are you going to put a video of yourself?
I don't know what she was doing there. That was her. So you can look at other people.